The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've been increasingly concerned about attacks on media and the free press and this meme of fake news as a placeholder effectively for any kind of news that Donald Trump simply doesn't like or that's critical of something that Donald Trump has done. And the phrase enemy of the people has been thrown around quite a bit. And typically, when that phrase is thrown around, someone will go to Sarah Huckabee Sanders or to whoever and say, isn't it dangerous for the president to be calling the press the enemy of the people? And usually the way they clarify or sort of retroactively post hoc wordsmith it is say, no, the press isn't the enemy of the people. The fake news media are the enemy of the people. And if you're not fake news, then you're okay. Of course, that's extraordinarily problematic for a number of different reasons that we've discussed, including that the fake news designation in and of itself is completely bogus. That gets us to this week, where Donald Trump has now straight up labeled the New York Times the enemy of the people in a tweet as a result, presumably, of that story I told you about that the New York Times broke, claiming that Donald Trump went to his acting attorney general, Matthew Whitaker, and pressured him to take control of an investigation into Donald Trump. That's what we think this tweet was in reference to. Donald Trump tweeting, quote, "The New York Times reporting is false. They are a true enemy of the people." And of course, right below that, the New York Times responding that they stand by the investigation, which was rigorously reported and based on a review of confidential White House documents and interviews with dozens of people in the government and close to Donald Trump. So what you'll notice is that Donald Trump's tweet calling the New York Times the enemy of the people, number one, doesn't refute any specific claims made by the New York Times, doesn't even mention a specific article or report. But again, it's pretty clear what Trump was angry about here, because the article, if true, implicates Donald Trump and Matthew Whitaker in crimes, more crimes in the case of Donald Trump. And New York Times reporters actually have to be careful here, not in terms of their reporting. Their reporting is top notch and well sourced and all of that. They need to be careful because Trump's anti-media rhetoric is actually putting reporters in danger. Just last week, minutes after Trump criticized the media at his Build the Wall rally in El Paso, Texas, a BBC camera person was attacked. There are other instances. It has gotten really, really ugly. And the New York Times publisher, A.G. Sulzberger, has even said to Donald Trump personally, please stop with the anti-media rhetoric because it's putting our people in danger. But Trump doesn't care. And if there's any funny element to this, it's that last month when Trump, I guess, wasn't mad at the New York Times, he had that sit-down in-person interview with Maggie Haberman and another New York Times reporter. And he said nothing is more important than the New York Times. Now, all of a sudden, his tune has changed. And he says the New York Times is actually the enemy of the people. So let's break this down into its component parts, as I like to do, and take it, quote, step by step. The New York Times is an excellent newspaper. Their journalistic standards are, to say top-notch, you don't even need to say top-notch. They adhere to correct journalistic standards, full stop, all right? Do they ever get things wrong? Sure. Who doesn't get a detail wrong? Who doesn't make a mistake that has to be corrected? But they correct it. They go to all parties and they ask for comment. They corroborate statements from people they are talking to. They issue corrections when they make mistakes. They do all the right things. And that gets us to this tendency by Donald Trump to slam the media. And that's an authoritarian tendency. And it's part of a package of authoritarian tendencies that Donald Trump has. So take a step back for a second. You can think whatever you want about the New York Times, but if you do a serious analysis of their journalistic standards, to call them fake news is wrong. To call them the enemy of the people is wrong. Donald Trump's primary targets, other than Democrats, during his time as president have been the media, intelligence agencies of the United States, The courts, when they decide against Donald Trump, attacking both courts and individual judges, the justice system, when he doesn't like what the justice system is doing, whether it's Andrew McCabe or Rod Rosenstein or James Comey or whoever else, these are the institutions that authoritarians attack, period. This is not even really a discussion. Trump is an authoritarian who hates the fact that other entities have agency and are supposed to have independence. We have a former acting FBI director, as I told you a couple of days ago, in Andrew McCabe, who says it's possible that Donald Trump could be a Russian asset. This is how dictators, in Trump's case, it's more like wannabe dictator, want to be authoritarian autocrat. This is how they behave. Criticisms of them by media or by implicitly by the justice system that wants to investigate them, or by courts that make decisions that go against what it is Donald Trump wants. They see them as the enemies of the people because they are doing something that they don't like personally. This is how North Korea's leaders behave and how they've governed for decades. Any attack from the foreign power on one of the leaders of North Korea, not a physical attack, but a rhetorical attack, is said to be an attack on all of the North Korean people when it's not. And in fact, the interests of the North Korean people are almost diametrically opposed to the interests of the North Korean families, the North Korean regime family. In the exact same way, what the New York Times is doing is good for the American people. They're doing good investigative journalism. They are sourcing it. They are reporting on what government is doing in order to keep government accountable. And Donald Trump wants you to believe that the New York Times is the enemy. Straight out of the authoritarian dictatorial playbook. And unfortunately, a lot of people on the right are giving Donald Trump a pass for it. What will it take for them to no longer give Donald Trump that pass? Let me know on Twitter, where you can find me at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Henry Kimbaya. Henry, thank you for being a supporter of the show. Really appreciate the fact that you are saying, sign me up. I want to be a supporter of progressive independent media that I agree with. Also, thanks to Lexi Pasley, who's today's sustaining member of the day, who has been with us nearly 5 years. You can join Henry and Leslie by signing up at www.joinpakman.com. Coupon code SAVE35 saves you $35 off of the $60 membership. That expires later today, so take advantage of that. Okay, let's go to the phones at 617-830-4750, see what's on people's minds. Very big week politically. Let's start with our caller from the 207 area code. Caller from 207, who's there?
Hi, this is TJ.
Hey, TJ, what's going on?
The other day I had a thought about the 14th Amendment and my state, Maine and Vermont, we allow inmates to vote.
Right.
But could the argument be made that any states that permanently revoke the right to vote are in violation?
Yeah, I've heard that before. I mean, I've read that before, and you can make that argument, but it's not really been tested to my knowledge at this point. And I think that there is sort of a better path forward, which is that fighting it on constitutional grounds is a much longer process than doing what, for example, states can do directly via ballot questions and just reinstate those voting rights. So I think that you're
like
I've heard
Florida
that before,
did?
but there are other paths forward.
Yeah. Also, I have this other thought about taking the Senate. Could
Okay.
it just be simple enough to split New York City into several states?
Well, that's been proposed with California as well, and it's not quite so simple to split states up, particularly when one region of a state is significantly more responsible for the financial viability of a state, and there would be, I mean, that's it. I don't know how simple it is to create more states. I think that you may be overstating that simplicity, TJ.
Uh,
Okay, thanks for the
it'd
call. I
be a long
appreciate it. I'm going
process.
to let you
Thanks.
go. I've got a bunch of people here holding on, but it's great to hear from you. Let's go to our caller from the 857 area code. Who's calling from 857?
Hi, this is Zach.
Hey, Zach.
I'm calling from Cleveland.
Oh, all right.
So my question to you is about BDS. It's a question that I wanted to call in and ask you for a long time. I had a day off work today, and I just finally had the chance. I know you don't support it, and I kind of understand why. But to me, it seems that the reasons you don't support it are kind of right-wing reasons, or what I would consider right-wing reasons. And it seems to me that you're mostly afraid to be political bedfellows with people you disagree with.
So what would be, hold on,
correct?
let's break it down piece by piece. What's an example of a right-wing reason why you perceive I don't support the BDS movement?
Okay, so I know a lot of people who don't support BDS, for instance. They don't support it because they say that there are people within the movement or others who support the movement who are people who I would also disagree with, even as somebody who does support it. People who want to get rid of Israel, who have a legitimate hatred of Jews. And I think it seems like a lot of people who are afraid of supporting it seem to be afraid of being political bedfellows with those type of people.
Oh, no, I'm not afraid of that. And you said this is something that other people do. So I don't know are we talking about what you perceive my reasons to be or other people that you know? No.
This is from my understanding of when I ever hear people talk against BDS. It seems to be one of the main reasons that I hear people say. If it is this one and there's another reason, and I think this other reason comes from a confusion of how BDS started. I actually saw a post from a Facebook post from Majid Nawaz recently, where he kind of joked about why aren't people doing boycotts of all these other countries that have human rights violations.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that he has a fundamental misunderstanding of how BDS started. BDS started, from my understanding, because the peaceful Palestinians wanted a non-violent, peaceful way of protesting what they perceived as oppression.
You're saying Palestinians you're saying Palestinians who are in other countries, right? Or are you saying Palestinians who are in the West Bank and Gaza?
I mean, in West Bank and Gaza and around the world, they wanted the world to support them in a peaceful, non-violent way of resisting. So they call for BDS. I mean, we all disagree with Hamas's more militaristic tactics.
Okay.
Of course, but it seems to me that if you disagree with Hamas's violent resistance and you disagree with the peaceful Palestinians' move for a peaceful resistance, what are we leaving the people?
Okay, yeah, but there's a few confusions here.
What option are we leaving them on
every detail of it? But so what you have to understand is that in the West Bank, tons of Palestinians are working for Israeli companies and are traveling into sort of Israel proper, for lack of a better term, and they're not boycotting Israeli companies. That's the first thing you have to understand. So the idea that this is what Palestinians are calling for and want isn't true. Now, one of the reasons
I'm definitely not saying all Palestinians.
Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on. One of the reasons I oppose BDS is that I believe in the long term, it's actually going to hurt a lot of Palestinians if it were to be successful. Now, it's been years now, and I don't see any evidence that it's actually going to be successful. But if people want to keep doing it, by all means, do it. I'm going to lobby for change in other ways. And I don't think it's a right-wing, I don't know if it's a common right-wing thing to say, I care about and am concerned about Palestinians, and that's a priority in figuring out what it is that I support. That doesn't sound right-wing to me.
And so, in what way are you voicing your opposition in any type of meaningful way?
I'm calling for. I mean, listen, I don't live in Israel, so it's like how much I I have no more say about whether Netanyahu stays or goes than I have about whether Shinzo Abe stays or goes, but I'm an opponent of the Netanyahu government. I believe the Netanyahu government has to go. I don't think they're arbiters for peace. I lobby for an end to all settlements, which I believe to be illegal and an impediment to peace. I mean, you know, there's a whole long list of things I lobby for.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate the call. Let's see. Let's go to the 951 area code. Caller from 951. Who's there and where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm calling from Southern California, soon to be Washington.
Cool. Okay. What's going on?
Hey, I just wanted to call in and tell you how happy I was that Bernie is running. I mean, I was just his speech coming out. I mean, it was just so powerful. You know, it's hard not even to, you know, break up and tear up over hearing, you know, his message.
Yeah. So I'm curious.
And if I wasn't unemployed, I would have been one of those people who put in for that $4 million that he raised. You know, I mean, that's just the power of the people right there. You know, and
right. And did you support?
I just think he's. Go ahead.
Did you vote for Bernie in the 2016 primary?
Oh yeah, I was a big Bernie supporter, and I was really upset when Hillary rigged the election. And
right. So my question to you was going to be: after Bernie was not the nominee, who did you vote for in the general election?
Well, I think most of people like me, you know, held their nose and voted for Hillary because
you voted for Hillary.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And why did you decide to do that despite the fact that your guy wasn't there?
Because, you know, you're basically voting against pure evil. Donald Trump, you know, I couldn't see, you know, and, you know, I think the third party's a wasted vote. So, you know.
Well, listen, I hope everybody goes into the 2020 election with that perspective, because unfortunately not everybody did. And that's one piece of why we ended up with Donald Trump.
Yeah, but I think the public, you know, the politicians, the corporate politicians can ruin it, you know, and, you know, right at the end, like, you know, basically Lucy with Charlie and the football, you know, and pull it away right at the end, you know, and I
know.
You know, I think if that happens, you know, Bernie should run as an independent, you know, because that's, you know, 2 stolen elections in a row. And
yep, I mean, that would give the election to Trump, unfortunately, but it's an idea.
You know, you know, it's going to be on every corporate Democrat in the entire United States.
Okay, thank you for the call. Very much appreciate it. And we will be following Bernie's campaign very, very closely for sure. Let's go to the 661 area code. Who's calling from 661 today?
Hi, my name's Justin Brown.
Hey, Justin, what's going on?
Oh, nothing, man. I mean, I was wondering, just another day in paradise here in Bakersfield. It's sunny and stuff.
Lovely.
I was wondering if you've ever seen the movie Idiocracy.
Is that the Bill Maher one? No, that's Religulous, right? Wait, which one's Idiocracy?
Right, that's Religiously the Bill Maher one. Idiocracy was by Mike Judge, the creator of things like King of the Hill and Beavis and Butthead.
You know, I don't remember if I've seen it or just read about it. I don't remember offhand.
I highly recommend watching. Just, you know, it's probably on Netflix or Hulu or whatnot. Anyways, I think we're closely approaching it. It's a comedy satire, but
okay, yeah, no, I didn't see it. I didn't see it. I didn't see it, but I know what you're referring to.
Highly recommended. I think it's a Saturday Night Live production. Or anyhow, my question though is how to deal with opposition people when you're debating them or having a discussion and they result to ad hominem attacks or straw man.
Well, it depends if you are you trying to change their mind? Are you trying to score points, or are you trying to de-escalate? When they switch to ad hominems, what are you trying to do?
Well, a lot of times I have to resort to de-escalation and point out, you know, some of the flaws in their arguments, or just ask them to supply evidence, which seems to be a foreign concept for a lot of people.
Well, listen, I mean, there's no, I'm sort of careful about even giving this advice, but there's nothing that will fire up someone who disagrees with you and is starting to use ad hominems and escalate more than saying, why are you becoming so emotional about this? And I say that, I mean, you can actually say that, and then they will probably say something like, because you're not making any sense or you're wrong or whatever. And it might open up the door for you to say, okay, can you, in a calm way, explain to me what I've said that's incorrect? And really try to like narrow the conversation to specific assertions. Because what happens a lot of times, especially when it's just kind of casual political debate, is there's kind of a de facto gish gallop. Gish gallop is when somebody just says a whole bunch of stuff. And the idea in a debate is the other person just like can't keep up with all the different arguments and refute them one by one. So what can be very useful is to try to slow the entire thing down. It's your judgment whether you want to tell the other person to calm down. People really don't like being told to calm down. And then try to focus in on one thing at a time and say, okay, hold on. You said you're in favor of Trump's tax cuts because tax cuts for the rich are good for the economy. Can you tell me of another tax cut in history that was good for the economy? And how did you know that it was good, right? Try to sort of like compartmentalize into specific questions. That will often either end the conversation, get the person even more upset, or maybe get you somewhere productive.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah, I consider myself a progressive, so most of the time I am arguing with people who are conservative. Right. And so pointing out a historical example would really help out. I really appreciate it.
The other thing that can be useful is, especially once you understand that a lot of us, we think that we have come to our political positions on the basis of rational thought. And what people like Jonathan Haidt and others have sort of discovered through moral psychology research is that very often we have an initial intuition and then later we find rationalization. So later when someone asks us, why do you believe that? We cite only the rationalization. So like an example would be abortion. Most of us immediately have like an intuitive reaction where we say we are okay with it or not okay with it. If you're not okay with it, you then go and find ways to rationalize that position, but you still sought those out because of that intuitive gut response. If you understand that, you can sometimes also have better conversations with people.
Right on. I really appreciate that.
Okay, appreciate the call. Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
Yep,
Bye.
take care. Okay, let's see who else is holding on today. Let's go to the 786 area code. Who's calling from 786 today?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
This is Sean calling from South Miami.
Hey, Sean.
I was just calling to ask you to elaborate on something you said on the Monday show.
Okay.
When you were talking about how Trump believed Putin when he said North Korea did not possess the missiles capable of hitting the U.S. mainland, instead of believing our own intelligence officials.
Right.
He said, and I quote, "This is an existential threat to the United States." What do you mean by existential threat, and why do you believe that?
What I mean is that having a president who seems to be so committed ideologically to believing the assertions of authoritarians around the world over the assessments of our own intelligence community has the potential to, or is in practice, a national security threat for the United States. That's what I meant.
Okay. Because I was trying to differentiate. Maybe you meant North Korea specifically.
No, not specifically.
But
I mean,
can
listen,
see. Okay.
you could have the conversation about how much of an existential threat is North Korea to the U.S. And of course, there are people who say it's a lot of bluster, but they've shown restraint for decades. They're not actually the existential threat some make them out to be. But it's the more general, just believing Putin over our own intelligence.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was trying to differentiate, because I've believed that for a really long time, that North Korea, it would be against their own interests to really go all out with nuclear bombs, because it would assure their own destruction.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the history of that, there's this pattern with North Korea where the famine gets worse, economic sanctions get worse, and then you start seeing bluster about tests or procuring nuclear materials or development or whatever. And then historically, the way it goes is then we up our aid a little bit, and they sort of back off a little bit. But I agree with you. I mean, we're now in the third generation of North Korean regime that seems to understand that it's sort of like mutually assured, or at least assured self-destruction, to actually bomb the U.S. or whatever.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you for elaborating on that.
Okay, appreciate the call. Thank you so much. Let's see here. Let's go to the 408 area code. Who's calling from 408 today?
Hey, David, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Who's this?
This is Jonathan Chavez. I'm from San Jose. Right now I'm living in San Diego.
Cool.
That's where I'm calling from technically. But I just have a question. I know this is kind of like a random, but I just want to see your opinion on it. Have you ever read the works of Karl Marx, and do you believe there is a need for a more radicalization of the left in the United States?
Okay, so I see those as two. Are they two separate questions, or is it the same one, or is it part of the same one?
They are more like two questions.
Okay, all right. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that sarcastically. I just mean, are you saying, like, do I agree with Marx on that issue? I read Marx during my time studying economics undergrad, so that's been a little while at this point. I haven't since beyond essays about Marx's teachings, but I read Marx directly, translated, obviously, when I was an undergraduate at the University of Massachusetts. So as far as how did you frame it? Does the left need to become more radical in order to do something in particular?
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, or in my belief, we need to move away from capitalism itself. So I suppose if you actually believe, I know you kind of more of a social democrat, so I know maybe you don't, but
right.
Maybe like overall, maybe you might believe that having a more radicalized left might help in that way, at least.
Okay, good. This is an excellent question. So the term radicalized is maybe where we would have a semantic or a subjective disagreement. I think that unless further left ideas become mainstreamed, we are not going to move the debate to the left. So this is like one of the main accomplishments of Bernie's 2016 candidacy, was that he mainstreamed the ideas of Medicare for all, tuition-free college. Not that it was his idea, but he talked about it a lot, financial transaction taxes and higher marginal tax rates on top earners, et cetera, et cetera. Now that that has been mainstreamed, there's an opportunity for an even further left sort of idea to start pulling the Overton window more and more to the progressive side. I don't think that we need a strong Stalinist presence in the United States political milieu in order to become more socially democratic the way I would like to see. So I think that, yes, we need more mainstreaming of further left ideas, but I don't know that we benefit from having really untenable and getting into more of the authoritarian leftism. I don't think social democracy benefits from that type of radicalization.
Oh, I got you. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be authoritarian.
Well, give me an example. So like, okay, let's put the rubber on the road, so to speak. What sort of radical left ideas would you like to see more mainstreamed in the American left?
Well, I would definitely think that if we kind of need to move towards thinking about these ideas, not in terms of how we saw in the Soviet Union, because obviously there's a lot of problems in the Soviet Union in order to, implement socialism there.
Mm-hmm.
However, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to actually go through this crazy, militaristic transition in order to get there. We can do this, through policy and by educating the public little by little, and having us eventually transition over into a socialist economy. Because I personally believe that there really isn't going to be a choice eventually, that the system is not going to survive as it is.
Okay, so how do you imagine the transition happening, and who do you think, in what way would we advocate for it in the political discussion that happens on the left?
So, I kind of take after what Richard Wolff has been kind of advocating for, more worker co-ops, if a corporation would want to leave or try to like outsource its industry or whatever, we could have a I believe it's called the right of first refusal. I think it's what the policy is called.
Yep.
Exactly, where instead of having we could have the employees who work in the actual industry decide whether they're okay with like letting the corporation leave, or
Right.
they can decide to keep the corporation there or the factory there or their jobs there, and then the government will then buy out the actual factory and the corporation, whatever, and then they can own it and work themselves as a work co-op.
Got it. Good. Okay. So you sort of like promote the idea of worker co-ops in the United States, but at a certain point you said you want to move to actual socialism, which makes it, you can no longer have private business ownership. It's all social ownership of businesses. How do you make that transition? Do you declare that private business is no longer allowed?
Well, yeah, for me, the beginning part would be the more making making that type of like institution more like normal among the regular working people.
Yep.
And then through that, the culture of the whole the way we talk about like ownership will probably change, and I think more people will probably be more open to socialization or nationalization, and if we can keep democracy and have that. Actually, in fact, in my opinion, that's the most important thing inside this transition, is that the society needs to be democratic in order for it to be a
But now
true,
hold on.
like,
So you said first you were talking about socializing the means of production, then you said nationalizing it, which is different altogether. But so here we don't have to go back and forth, even though those are two different things. The important thing I would say is I'm totally with you on the promotion of co-ops and everything else you're talking about. I don't know how you get to saying, okay, now no private business ownership is allowed and you can only have the co-ops. That sounds to me like it would require authoritarianism to implement it, but it's probably a bigger discussion. I'm out of time, so I've got to let you go. Sorry to everybody I was not able to get to today, but we'll take calls again next week, and I'll probably do another stream soon and open up the phone lines as well. Quick break, back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Okay, for this week's classic interview, you might remember last week I pointed to this economic indicator that we can look at right now, whereby a record number of Americans are 90 days or more behind on their car loans. And we talked about why the automobile, but also the automobile finance indicators are really important if we want to try to figure out what might be coming in the economy. This week's classic interview relates to exactly that. It's when I interviewed Carol Locknett from the Edmunds.com features section, and so much of what we discussed was exactly about this issue. How does car ownership, and even beyond that, car culture, figure into the economy? Let's get into that interview from a few years ago right now. I'm joined today by Carol Locknett, features editor for car shopping website Edmunds.com. The topic today is quiet vehicles, vehicles that in some cases are so quiet that it is becoming an issue of safety. Tell us, how recently has this become an issue, and is it really an issue focused around hybrid and electric vehicles?
It really is an issue focused around hybrid electric vehicles and pure electric vehicles. And it came to prominence, I think, around 2008, 2009. And the issue really is that those cars, because they don't have conventional internal combustion engines, are very, very quiet at low speeds. So these are speeds under about, I think it's about 18 miles an hour. So it became an issue initially with the blind community. The National Federation of the Blind raised this as an issue because it was concerned about its members who rely obviously on some audio cues for safety as they move around cities. not getting those when it comes to EVs and hybrid EVs.
And typically the idea of a quiet car is kind of considered a nice feature generally, or even a luxury feature in higher end, but maybe not necessarily hybrid or electric vehicles. But we're actually starting to see now, and in fact, there's going to be a law, which I'm sure you can tell us about, which will mandate that vehicles must make noise.
Right. Well, I think the difference here is that it's a luxury aspect when you're inside the car, right? So you want to be in a car that is quiet and soothing. If you like a luxury ride and you feel a little bit cocooned from the hurly-burly of the city around you. But cars, even luxury cars on the outside, make noise. Their engines make noise. So the issue really came to prominence when there was a conversion from a traditional internal combustion engine to essentially an electric generator, which is at low speeds very, very quiet.
And when we look at the actual number of fatalities and incidents of pedestrians being hit by vehicles, is there a significant increase that we can see over recent years?
Yes, NHTSA did some studies around this, and we're not talking about fatalities, thankfully, because these tend to be low-speed incidents. They tend to be things that happen when a vehicle is backing out, when a vehicle is making a turn, when a vehicle is in a parking lot, although they had a little trouble isolating that in terms of the study. But the fact is that when there is an accident, accidents involving electric vehicles or hybrid electric vehicles are 35% higher for pedestrians and 57% higher for cyclists, bicyclists.
Yeah,
so yes,
both of those are huge issues here in New York City where we are. And I'm curious whether some of the new so-called safety features, and I say so-called not because I don't believe that that's what they are, because usually they're under this umbrella, like backup cameras, proximity sensors, blind spot indicators, do those counteract in any sense the danger posed by the quiet vehicles, or are we really talking about two totally separate lines of thought here?
I haven't seen in any of the research that NHTSA did up to this point a consideration of whether those would help. Common sense would tell you it's got to be helpful because particularly in the case of backing up, that's a particular issue, I think, for both pedestrians and cyclists and the motorist because you do have sort of inhibited vision. I would think that backup cameras, any kind of alert system, some of the blind spot warning systems also have rear collision warnings, have to be helpful to sort of give the driver of a hybrid or EV a heads up that they are sort of in stealth mode, if you will, and that the pedestrian or cyclist is not aware of them. So it's got to be helpful.
In my experience driving, and I try to drive as little as possible within New York City, but I drive pretty frequently to leave and come back from the city, I find that so much of what I see going on the road that is wrong, in other words, people who clearly they're going 30 miles under the speed limit, you drive by and they're on a cell phone. They're wildly changing lanes, signaling in the opposite direction than the direction they're going. I'm sure you know all of the stuff that is so prevalent. So often I feel like no matter how much attention I'm paying as the so-called good driver, good guy with a car, I can really only limit the risk posed to me by other drivers to a certain extent. And that to a certain extent, there are just so many distracted and otherwise bad guys with a car, so to speak, that I can't really shield myself or cocoon myself completely. Apply that to this issue of quiet cars and pedestrians. And is there, as the driver, what can you be doing? Can you truly protect yourself from a pedestrian who may be crossing the street where there is no crosswalk? But also from the point of view of the pedestrian, can you be completely inoculated from the possibility of a car hitting you simply by following the rules? I think clearly the answer is no.
Clearly, the answer is no. I think for all of us, whether we're, and probably like you, I on any given day may be a pedestrian, I may be a bicyclist, a driver. You have to be super alert and assume, I think, which I'm sorry to say this, assume that other people are going to be stupid because that so often is what's happening. Pedestrians, are not angels all the time. People are glued to their smartphones. If they're not plugged into headphones, they may well be looking down at the screen and texting or writing or doing any number of tasks while they're walking. which I find extremely irritating as a driver, as another pedestrian, as a bicyclist. Bicyclists, I don't know how it is in New York, but in my community, bicyclists ride on sidewalks. They ride on the wrong side of the street. They do all kinds of things that make them very, very difficult to cope with as a motorist. Motorists do exactly, in California, they do exactly what you're describing, is they're on their cell phones, despite the fact here in California it's against the law to do that. And they're completely distracted. So, I think that in this society, all of us try to ameliorate the dangers posed to us. And sometimes you do it through laws and regulations, and sometimes you just try to do it through common sense. But, we just have to have our heads up and our attention focused all the time.
Last thing I want to touch on, since we have a couple of minutes, you touched on this briefly, and I'm curious what your thought is as someone who is at an organization like Edmunds. Texting while driving, is there anything that can be done to actually get people to stop doing it? Because we see more and more campaigns, advocacy campaigns, billboards, commercials, et cetera, and I see texting while driving more than ever before. It is so often connected with that vehicle that from a mile away you can tell something is not right with the way the vehicle is behaving. I drive by and the person is looking down and texting. Is anything effective at getting people not to text and drive?
That's such a good question. And I think based on your experience, and I think I haven't seen any data that says that since the inception of X campaign, we see X reduction in texting. I don't know what it's going to take. I really don't. I've watched a very, very moving short film about the carnage, literally the carnage in the wake of people texting while driving. And maybe it should be mandatory viewing every time we get in the car. I don't know. It's just so easy and so tempting to text. As you know, one of the national safety boards, not NHTSA, but the Accident Investigation Agency, the federal one, has called for a complete and total ban on cell phones in cars, period. And I think that's sort of extreme, but that may be the only solution to the problem of someone who may literally be addicted to their smartphone and unable to stop themselves from texting.
It is incredible, and it'll be interesting to see as vehicle technology continues to develop whether there might be a technology solution to the issue of texting while driving, but we'll continue obviously to follow it. We've been speaking with Carol Locknett, features editor for Edmunds.com. Thanks so much for being on with us today.
Thanks for having me, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, let's get into audience questions for the week. First one is from Ryan, who says, hey, David, what's the most efficient and effective way to convince non-voters to vote? You've been talking about the importance of voting for 2020, but how do we get people to actually do it? Excellent question. I've been saying 2020 can be won or lost on turnout alone. So how do we actually get people to vote? Even if we understand that we're better off convincing people to vote who already agree with us than trying to argue with and change the minds of Trumpists, you still have to figure out how to get non-voters to vote. Something has kept them from voting in the past, or they weren't old enough, in which case we just have to explain to them, it's now time, you're now old enough. But let's explore it for people who have been old enough to vote for a while but have not voted before. First of all, resist the urge to just shame and insult them. I share with you this disbelief, quite frankly, about why wouldn't you vote? I mean, voting is not everything, but voting is sort of the starting point for being politically engaged. But it's really important if we want results. We don't really care about whether they feel bad about not voting or not, as long as they vote. Okay, so resist the urge to insult people or to shame them for not voting or to call them dumb for not voting. Engage them on why they haven't voted, and importantly, sympathize with that. Okay, if someone says to you, I don't vote because I don't think my vote matters, don't say, that's stupid, it does matter, and here's why. Say, I understand feeling that way, especially because we vote and vote and vote, and it seems like so much doesn't change. So I totally understand why you would feel that way. Here's why I think it's important to vote. Voting is inconvenient. Don't say, how stupid are you that you can't get it together to just go over and vote. Say, I understand that. I work. I get it. There's lines. You worry about, do I have the right documents, or do I need any documents, or voter intimidation, all this stuff. Don't say that these concerns are unfounded. But then you have to really make the case that not voting isn't neutral, that whatever your reasons are for not voting, you are participating in the end result as much as voters are by saying, I'm choosing not to have a voice, and I'm going to let the people who choose to vote have disproportionately more power by direct consequence of me not voting. The younger the person you're talking to is, you should also be making the case that they, by voting, are going to make small redirections to the future path of the United States that will impact them for way more years than older folks are going to be impacted, simply because on average they're going to be alive for a longer period of time. And then maybe the most important thing I've found in getting people to become engaged is not to overly focus on the impact of their vote alone, because no matter what case you make, one vote is just one vote in the end. Concede that their vote alone is not going to be what fixes things, but make it clear that it's a starting point for activism, and only by doing the homework that's required to be an informed voter and actually going out and voting are you going to build a framework of understanding of what's going on around you that will then better position you to be an activist for what's important for you. Speak about policy if you identify specific policy issues that are up for debate or that could be influenced significantly based on the election you are discussing. So if it's a local election and traffic issues are really important to them, and there are traffic decisions to be made or that will be made by the victor of the upcoming election, focus on that and focus on how that relates to them and to their lives. And then lastly, use some polite peer pressure without shaming someone for not voting. Everybody's doing it, and trying to get some kind of commitment about participating can actually go a really, really long way without bullying people, obviously, but some polite sort of light peer pressure, I found can also be extraordinarily effective. Let me know how you have succeeded at getting people to vote. And again, the reason we're talking about this is that 2020, any one of the 2020 Democratic contenders can defeat Donald Trump on turnout alone, but it's not going to happen unless we actually know how to get people out there and voting. Next question today is from Cameron. Cameron says, hey, David, I know you're in favor of cannabis legalization, but what other drugs would you legalize? So this is a great question. Let's first understand some basics. What have we learned about drugs and the war on drugs over the last 30 or so years, and even going back to prohibition in the early 20th century? We've learned, number one, if you ban something, it doesn't go away. It's so silly because it's so simple. But a lot of people seem still not to get that when they think about what drug policy should be. And in fact, banning something can make the cost and price go up, both the cost to create it as well as the price to the end user. It can create black markets, which are often rife with violence and other types of criminality. All of those bad side effects happen when you try to ban things that people want to have access to. Okay, my position today is that use and possession of all drugs should be decriminalized. Absolutely 100%. Now, where I'm still unsure, and I think that it's really, I could come up with some much more black and white position just for the sake of doing it for the show, but I'm simply not there yet one way or the other on legalization of all drugs, particularly those with a very high overdose risk and highly addictive nature, like, for example, heroin and cocaine. Now, I might come around to this, okay? Where I am, it's funny, I barely even feel like I need to defend the decriminalize all drugs, because it seems at this point that there is not even any kind of strong case against that to be made if you understand the realities and the facts on the ground. With the legalization of heroin, the reason that I'm sort of split is that I recognize that there is a massive difference between cannabis and heroin in terms of its addictive nature, in terms of its effects on the human body. and in so many other ways. The question is, are we, by virtue of keeping something like heroin, for example, decriminalized instead of legalized, are we still going to have a lot of the problems of prohibition? If you decriminalize heroin, but still make it illegal to produce and sell, and what is out there on the streets is unregulated and tied in with violence and possibly mixed in with other more harmful chemicals, are we really solving much other than just the incarceration piece by merely decriminalizing heroin and cocaine and not legalizing them? But on the other side, and this could be my sort of intuitive brain rather than the rational brain reacting this way, am I okay saying that cocaine can be advertised the way cannabis can be advertised in states where cannabis has been legalized? That's less clear to me. So that's where I am right now. 100% decriminalization of all drugs. Legalization of all drugs, I've not yet been convinced, but I'm open to it. And if you have good arguments for me, by all means, send them my way, because this is something I'm still figuring out for myself. Last question today. David, aside from your particular interest in running for president, which I don't have, by the way, should naturalized citizens be allowed to run for president? Yeah, so what the person is pointing out, an anonymously submitted question, is that I was born in Argentina, so as the law currently stands, I can't run for president. I actually don't have an interest in running for president, but it's true that I wouldn't be legally able to. So the question is, should people who are naturalized American citizens like me be allowed to run for the presidency of the United States? I believe that the answer is yes. It's just there's no doubt whatsoever. I researched this a bunch over the weekend and found no compelling case made for why we should, in 2019, prevent naturalized U.S. citizens from running. I believe that Ted Cruz, I think there's no question whatsoever about Ted Cruz's eligibility. I think he's disgusting, and I think the world would be a much darker place if he were president. But I think there's not even a question as to whether Ted Cruz should be allowed to run, just as an example, right? Whether he was born in Canada or not. The original point of restricting presidential candidates to natural-born citizens rather than naturalized, which, by the way, is not even a term that's explicitly defined, but let's ignore that for now. The whole point of that restriction was that at the early at the early stages of the United States of America, there was a desire to prevent the colonial European powers from seizing any kind of influence over the United States of America. The United States was created to separate from those colonial European powers, and the idea was put something in place to prevent some degree of that power going back, like, for example, someone from one of those colonial powers coming to the United States and then achieving the presidency, for example. In the modern world in 2019, it's just not a concern. It de facto creates two classes of citizens. Not all citizens are exactly the same. You have citizens who are allowed to be president of the United States and citizens who are not allowed to be president of the United States, even though they are all citizens in the end. So if you are a citizen today, if you are of the required age to be president of the United States, you should be able to be president. And we don't want to, the country is better off, I think is the way I would say it, by allowing voters to choose from all of the people who are citizens rather than artificially restricting that field. Period. And I never say I'm 100% on anything. I'm open to having my mind changed, but I am 99.9% on this. If you don't agree, if you have some compelling case to be made, not in the 1800s, but in 2019, as to why naturalized American citizens shouldn't be allowed to be president of the United States, please let me know. And I would be very interested if someone can make a compelling case for that. We've got a great bonus show for you today. I'm out of time, but trust me, it's a really good one. Become a member at www.joinpacman.com. Become a patron at patreon.com/DavidPacmanShow. Both will give you access to the world-famous bonus show. I will speak to you then, or see you on Monday if you're not a member.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.